for McLaren, but a brilliant race for Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher.
Michael Schumacher. What an absolutely phenomenal drive by Michael Schumacher.
2005 season of Formula 1 was weird. Many people were happy to stop seeing Ferrari dominance, but have you ever wondered why did they stop winning? I mean, did Michael Schumacher broke something, or did he lose motivation? Or did FIA make some specific changes in the rulebooks to stop Ferrari from winning? Okay, there's a couple of things we have to discuss, because F1 20 years back was a very different sport than we are used to now. For example, we didn't have only one huge tire company that supplied the whole starting grid with identical tires, but this is an era where you as a team could have been chosen being supplied by Bridgestone or Michelin. Bridgestone tires were commonly known for better single lap performance, which was handful for crushing the best lap in qualifying, but on the other hand, you had to work with less predictable and more degrading rubber in your race. So the better answer for consistency was Michelin. Even though your pace in quali wasn't maybe the best, you could really find some speed in those tires over long stints. For such a long races, it was better decision to wear rubber from Michelin, and most of the starting grid of 2005 has actually decided to use them. But title-winning Ferraris of the last decade were running on Bridgestone. So the FIA thought, we're gonna change the rules slightly, just a bit. And in the October of 2004 was put a final decision of banning the tire change during the race. Which sounds really weird, because FIA didn't stop refueling, so you still had to stop during the race. They also changed aerodynamic rules, and most importantly, they raised front splitters. This made cars less glued to the track, and that of course has slowed cars down. Not even talking about the tire problem, because both Michelin and Bridgestone had to make harder compounds to survive qualifying and also races, which was another factor that has slowed cars down. However, the biggest icing on the cake was the rule about engines, because now they had to last at least 2 races before you could change them without penalty. I don't want to be disgraceful against FIA, even though they gave us many reasons recently, but the more detail you go through these new regulations, you simply start to see the pattern of every slight change was just made for the purpose of slowing Ferraris. And it's natural to somehow make the rules changing for ending the dominance, but the problem I have about these changes relates more to what consequences it actually had with the racing itself. The first round in Melbourne was prime example of what has gone wrong with this season. Giancarlo Fisichella was the fastest man in qualifying, and behind him finished surprisingly Jarno Trulli on Toyota. If that wasn't disastrous enough for Ferrari, they didn't actually had finished car for 2005 season in Melbourne, so they were forced to use the modified old one. That can actually sound like a promising opening for season, however in the whole race there were 7 overtakes on the track. 7. In 57 laps. We have to understand something about F1 teams. They absolutely do not care about some pretty fights on the track, and they don't like risky options. All of the engineers and strategists are driven by statistics, and why to risk an overtake on the track itself? Cars were less predictable, it was easy to damage tires. We had a lot of dirty air, so it has been a long process to overtake someone. The final results were Fisichella, Barrichello and Alonso, which has proven great pace of Renault in previous seasons. In the second race in Malaysia was straight answer to anyone who still didn't believe in Renault R25 and their drivers. Fernando Alonso made start to finish race in P1, which put him in the provisional P1 in driver standings, and Ferraris were still struggling in their old cars. However, McLaren also shown great and huge potential with their growing star Kimi Raikkonen and David Coulthard in a great pace, but MP420 refused to be at least somehow reliable. They had the best straight line speed, but Mercedes V10s were fragile, while Renault's engines were maybe less powerful but bulletproof reliable. Then came Bahrain Grand Prix, and it was mostly remarked as the hottest F1 race ever, but that still didn't stop Fernando Alonso from making straight start to finish dominance again. in more than 40 degrees Celsius. Also honorable mention for Toyota delivering a second podium finish with Jarno Trulli, which made a hopeful start for this 2005 season. However, all of that still doesn't cover the fact that Bahrain had only 13 overtakes and only 8 of them were visible on TV, which is just tragical. But maybe F1 was looking forward to better times in Imola, and Ferrari finally prepared their F2005 for racing. Even though Schumacher only qualified 13, he made one of the highlights with incredible pace. race, carving everyone till he did get behind Alonso. Michael was for more than 5 laps breathing on Fernando's neck, but the rising star again defended brilliantly and he claimed his third consecutive victory just by 0.2 of a second. After a long struggle, McLaren finally delivered the results they needed, with Raikkonen leading dominantly the Spanish Grand Prix. He claimed important points and McLaren seemed finally finding the right place in their setting. Well, the hope didn't last long. European Grand Prix was a total disaster not just for Raikkonen or Michelin, but for the whole FIA. 2005 regulations were primarily made for improving cars' safety and reducing cost. Or at least that's what FIA claimed.
Because this is the most fantastic finish to a Formula 1 race. Raikkonen is under real pressure. There goes the tyre, let's go. He just misses the VAR. I said he should have pitted. I told you he would have got a...
Kimi also proved his performance in Monaco and he took another win in Canada. So far it has been a season of dominant victories, but it's not usually very common that you see two teams taking such overwhelming wins, but when it comes to direct racing with each other on track, this season just somehow didn't deliver. Most of the races were just a huge hunt for the best pit stop advantage rather than trying to take some position by yourself. Anyway, then came the infamous Grand Prix, probably the biggest flop not just in motor racing related to US, but more importantly to the whole commissionery of FIA. The problem was pretty straightforward. Before the race, Michelin announced their problems with Indianapolis circuit because the fast right corner leading to the finish was so fast with so immense G-forces that Michelin wasn't actually sure if their tires would hold on over the whole race. It's just so bizarre that FIA announces something for stopping Ferrari's dominance, covering it by a new safety feature, but it turns out against them because Michelin isn't able to make a durable tire, which helped Schumacher won his only race in this season because teams using Michelin tires refused to race. Kimi Raikkonen was so upset by this decision that he wasn't listening to the chief engineer information lab. But then Ron Dennis himself had to tell him directly, "You're gonna box." And Kimi listened. I wonder if he would listen 10 years later. As a 10th race in this season came another dominant victory by Alonso on Magny-Cours. However, even the fact Raikkonen started 13 due to his engine penalty, he still managed to finish right behind Fernando and made one of the highlights. And again, McLaren has shown such a great pace in Silverstone, and we actually had a new winner because Juan Pablo Montoya has taken start to finish victory, but Alonso finished right behind him. What that means is that he secured another consistent podium without a technical issue or a driver error, so he built up even a bigger point gap on Raikkonen. German Grand Prix has always great racing because you basically have potential for an overtake in any hard braking zone or fast corner, which Hockenheim is full of. But 18 overtakes through the whole race is still pretty miserable, and in the end it's also partly because of Raikkonen's suspension failure again, but still one of the more appealing races in 2005. By the way, Alonso took a win with Montoya second and Button third. Back to the misery of another no overtake race in Hungary and a clear win for Raikkonen. This time Alonso had a smaller contact in the start, which meant that he wasn't able to hook up. 14th race in Turkey was one of the season highlights, with a strong fight between four cars of Renaults and McLarens. A little later, Montoya had an accident with Alonso, which Kimi has taken advantage of, and he took a win. And by the way, we could have seen the most overtakes in this season. Unbelievable 30 of them. Then Tifosi had to watch Ferrari 10 and 12 position in Monza, and on the absolute top just 7 overtakes. Montoya has led every single lap as it is tradition in 2005, with Alonso and Fisichella finishing after him, and there's no other way around to say that it was a boring Grand Prix. Only fun fact to point out that Raikkonen, despite his grid penalty, still kept his championship hopes alive. Actually, he had more wins than Alonso, but his McLaren wasn't able to finish as much races as Alonso's car was. But then came the famous Spa in wet conditions and another show of brilliancy from Raikkonen, which he proved over the whole race, with Alonso finishing second. And it was an important breaking point because Kimi narrowed the gap in championship by 17 points. By the way, in the meantime, I found out that Schumacher was third in driver standings, so I analyzed where the hell did he make so many points, and the reason was his consistency. 2 second finishes, 1 third, he made couple of top 5s, and that was enough to jump over Montoya and Fisichella. So that meant we could have potentially seen a battle between Alonso and Raikkonen in Brazil, but that wasn't the case. Montoya won the race by a solid margin, leaving behind everyone, and I definitely believe that many of you have a great nostalgia to this race, but Brazil had 6 overtakes and only 4 of them were visible in TV, which is really tragical. Raikkonen probably wasn't happy with this result, so the Japanese Grand Prix in Suzuka will always be remembered as probably the most brilliant single performance of Formula 1.
To
keep the McLaren behind him. He's really left himself to be a sitting target now. He'll have to go defensive down the inside. He'll have to go tighter than that. Oh, and they nearly touched. Can Raikkonen sweep in? Yes! Brilliant!
What a brilliant move! Side by side.
Because back in the day, Formula 1 had a single lap qualifying, and conditions in Japan were rapidly changing, which meant that Raikkonen or Alonso starting from the back had a wetter track than others. So he, as a big hero, started the race from 17, and with a just sheer pace and a brilliant strategy by McLaren, he has overtaken everyone, and this time not just in boxes, but he made many great passes through the grid, which resulted him being second in the last lap. Obviously it was late to take a championship back, but still, what a performance. We're bringing ourselves to a final 19 race in China, where Fernando Alonso proved that winning a driver title isn't enough. So he won another one for Renault in Constructor Championship, Raikkonen finished second, and Toyota had bring their car at a fantastic third place. They definitely weren't in the main championship battle, but it was the strongest season for Toyota in Formula 1. So with a gap of 20 years, what was actually the 2005 season of Formula 1 like? Well, on the one side, we could have seen a battle of two top-tier teams competing for a championship title. We have seen a consistent growth of underdogs of Toyota or freshly founded Red Bull. Red Bull actually had an interesting midfield battle with BAR. However, on the other side, it was a season when it has shown how important it is to set up proper and well-thought rules with a large time gap for teams to adapt to them. Because the rules just didn't work. We were averaging only 12 overtakes in one race because it was much safer to overtake someone with a good refueling strategy. And when there was actually some potential for an overtake on the track, cars were generating a lot of dirty air and turbulent air, which made the overtakes hard. Banning a change of tires didn't have any real benefit of safety or cost efficiency, it actually just made more dangerous situation with Kimi on Nürburgring or too much pressure on tires in Indianapolis. But not everything was bad. For example, forcing teams to use engines for at least 2 races had a benefit in developing a reliability in Formula 1 in general. You had to find a compromise between power and durability, which I found as an interesting strategical factor. 2005 season also brought a Turkish Grand Prix, which I absolutely adore, and the rules about limiting downforce made a ground for probably the most beautiful F1 cars ever. But what memories do you have from this season? Tell me in the comments, and I'm looking forward to see you again. Bye!